All right, y'all. Welcome to Keys to the Streets. Today, our focus is Black in Tech. And I have a very special guest, Nic Hollins, today to talk about his journey in tech. Honestly, an unconventional journey in tech. And I think that's, we always kind of make things work and have, different routes, and everyone does. And I think I'd love to have him on to tell his story. So thank you, Nic, for taking the time to meet with me today. How you doing this morning?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So let's just jump right into it. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for a living?
Yeah, Nic Hollins. I am a 39-year-old family man. Moved out here to Austin, Texas, roughly about 8 years ago. By profession, I am a senior solutions architect, specifically in the disciplines of application delivery networking and cybersecurity. Most folks are familiar with cybersecurity. Application delivery networking is essentially just a group of technology services or technology applications or hardware that's deployed simultaneously over a network to bring an application to life. So, for example, to get a movie you're watching on Netflix to your phone or your mobile device takes application delivery networking.
Thank you so much for putting that in layman's terms. Because I'm like, what does that really mean? How do we apply it in our everyday life? So thank you so much for kind of, segueing into that. And that brings me to my next question. I know you said you've been in Austin, I think, for 8 years. What brought you to Austin, and how has it been in Austin being a Black man in your field in a city that's becoming essentially a tech hub?
Well, that's actually why I moved here because I've been working in IT for about 15 years now. So, um, my wife and I were actually both born in the place we moved from, Albuquerque, New Mexico, but we kind of grew up in Texas after, leaving Albuquerque. She was in Fort Worth, and then I would kind of go back and forth between New Mexico and all over Texas from Houston to Wichita Falls. So after we got married, we wanted to return back to Texas because it's home, but we just couldn't really agree on where we wanted to move. And, I wasn't too big on moving to the DFW area. And I had a lot of clients that were starting to kind of move IT operations to Austin, building data centers down in Houston. So I kind of saw from a customer point of view, a shift in resources and labor to Texas, I'd say about 10 years ago. So I finally was able to get a remote job working for Vodafone out of London, doing cybersecurity for their managed service clients, large banks like Bank of America, Deutsche Bank. And so I decided, to use that time that opportunity rather to move out to Austin and try to take advantage of the growing tech market that I knew was just going to keep growing and growing.
So, as far as cybersecurity, can you explain that a little bit? How is that applied? Why is it necessary? And what you do in your daily roles?
Yeah. So, cybersecurity is more than just preventing people from hacking or getting access to your information. That is a big part of it. I think that's the use case that most people are familiar with and is most relevant to them. But it also encompasses preventing what's known as ransomware, where I may not, actually get inside of your network and take your information. I just might prevent you from being able to use your information. So, for example, if you are a hospital and you need to get patient records out, there's information that needs to come in and out of a hospital, internet connected machines that need to connect to the outside world, to operate, for somebody's medical issues. If I were to do what's called a denial of service attack, I could prevent those devices, that data from functioning, and essentially kind of wall you inside of your own network inside that hospital. So I may not have been able to hack anything, but I would, do that if I was a malicious actor to prevent you from being able to use the internet, which could very well cause harm to people, your brand, and that's another, aspect of cybersecurity. A common one that happens a lot that people are unaware of would be what are known as botnets, which are just a bunch of computers, devices, even like your cameras around your house, anything that can connect to an IP, they call them IoT or Internet of Things devices, that can then be used as zombies, I guess, for lack of a better term. Are you familiar with like Walking Dead?
I am.
Okay. So for Walking Dead fans out there, if you see like a horde of zombies, just mindless bodies walking towards, a group of actual living things or people, that's kind of what a botnet would be. It'd just be a bunch of devices aimlessly being targeted and pointed at, a target, essentially, whether it's a bank or a hospital. And the purpose of doing that is, again, to prevent the flow of traffic. I like to tell people, if you look at a door, maybe one or two people can go through a door at a time. If I try to fit 100 people through a door at once, I've effectively removed the use of the door. It's just no longer useful because nothing can come in and out because everything's just blocked there. And that's basically what a botnet will do. So you'll have people not necessarily hack to get into your, personal information. They just might want to use part of your device in the background to send what they call pings, or kind of knocking on the doors of their intended target. And if I can amass 500,000, maybe 1 million, 2 million, 3 million of these devices and target them at one person or network or data center, then I can kind of render it useless. So cybersecurity is important, to ensure that we have access to the services we need. It's important to ensure that people aren't doing things like logging into utility companies and taking out power, causing issues with stuff like the Hoover Dam, for example. So it's very essential now in this ever-connected world that we have security to prevent malicious actors from not only taking our information, but misusing devices to harm people or businesses.
So, for example, somebody can maybe hack, some student loan systems.
Yeah.
And wipe some debt clean. Wink, wink.
Oh, yes. It's fun. It's something that's actually happened in my experience. The state of New Mexico was one of our clients back when I worked at another company, and they were actually hacked by a former employee that left a back door on the system after he left. And you would pay him to remove things such as debt to the state, or even child support records and debts and things of that nature. So that is something that actually happens in a lot.
That's scamming on a whole new level.
Indeed.
But no, I thank you so much for giving that detailed explanation. And as far as cybersecurity, I'm not in tech. I've worked with a lot of techies, but to be honest, I've honestly heard cybersecurity in the last several years. So would you say this is a very growing market, or how long would you say it's been growing like this in the need for it?
I'd probably say for the last 18 years. I got into it about 15 years ago myself. And when I did, there wasn't positions like a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. Those didn't exist until recently. So I would say the market's exploded in probably the last 8 years or so, especially since around the time I moved to Austin. But it's been a growing need for the last at least 18 years. And my role within cybersecurity is to advise Fortune 100 companies and governments on what they need to do to secure their networks, or if they have a problem or an issue that they're worried about, or we call them attack vectors, then to assess it and essentially provide a solution to shore up that hole. I usually tell people I think the easiest way to kind of conceptualize what I do on the application delivery front is think of applications as cars, and then I designed a freeway system that the cars will travel over to get from point A to point B. And then while going through that freeway system, you erect security, barriers, traffic lights, things that kind of provide safety and security for that flow of traffic.
Gotcha. So I want to, take it back a little bit. I know you're very successful in your career now, but can you talk about maybe your journey into that career? How did you get into tech? I know you weren't initially in tech growing up, and talking about just your story of venturing or segueing into this field now.
Yeah, I would say the starter, I guess my origin story, so to speak, would be when I was about 15 years old. I had gotten grounded, and my dad at the time, he took away, the TVs over the summer. I had gotten in trouble with my summer job and, doing some stuff I shouldn't have been doing. And so he's like, you know what, you're going to use this computer for school, go to summer school, and I'm taking everything else out, the radio, TV, while I'm gone at work, and you just sit here and, use a computer. Well, I got the bright idea to start trying to, reverse engineer, web pages so I can learn how to, edit them and kind of create my own. So I started teaching myself CSS, which is a programming language for web development. HTML is another one. And I would essentially just, take a look at the source code of those pages, modify it, and then upload it to a free, site, a free hosting site, and kind of see what I got. And then I started using it as a way to communicate with people, because before we had social media networks, with Facebook or, I'm older, so MySpace and things like that, you would have just chat rooms, and trying to send pictures to people or audio files over those, dial-up connections just wouldn't work. It'd take too long, and sometimes just wouldn't complete the transfer. So, I would start building my own web pages just with some of the music I was making at the time with my friends, pictures of myself, and made it a lot easier to have a point of reference I could direct folks to. And they would do pay-per-click advertising at the time. And so I would, do a lot of clickbait stuff so I could get 2 or 3 cents per click and use that for gas money. And that's kind of how I started, looking into tech. But I originally wanted to do sociology and anthropology as a career. This was just more of a hobby I developed because I was a bit bored.
Gotcha. Now, I know offline we talked about, maybe you getting in a little bit of trouble before you got into tech. Can you talk a little bit about that, if you're okay with that?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm fine with that. So the following year, just like I said, I moved around a lot. My situation at home wasn't as stable as it should be. And, I kind of started doing some things, getting in trouble with some of my friends, selling drugs, going to jail. By the time I was 16, my mom had sent me back with my dad, and my dad was just like, I had it, and he kind of just kicked me out. So at that point, I had to get my own apartment and start, actually paying my own bills. And in doing so, there's not a whole lot of options that I guess you would say would allow you to cover everything at 16. And so there was things I was doing for supplemental cash that I shouldn't have been doing. And by the time I was 17, my senior year in high school, I'd been shot, gone to jail, had, a couple of felony charges that I had to get adjudicated off of my record. So that way I could get jobs in the future after turning 18. And so it was, after I had gotten released from juvenile detention and was recovering from, an injury I had sustained, a gunshot wound, I was mentored by a guy called Uncle EO. And so he and I, would kind of sit around, and, he kind of introduced me to the networking side of IT. And so I would, go hang out with him after school, maybe run a couple of plays, if you know what I mean, and then kind of learn about, this new thing to me, which was computer networking. And at the time, it was like 1999, 2000. So this was a whole new world. I just barely learned about websites. Now this guy, a black man that I knew, was working from home back then, doing network administration for universities, for local businesses. And so he was kind of, showing me how to do this. And so while I still had the idea of, going to school and trying to do something with sociology and maybe working, possibly with ACLU, because I wanted to change, legislation. When I was in jail, I learned a little bit about the process for, passing bills and, how to use case studies to kind of, and data to shape legislation. So I was like, you know what, that's something I wanted to do. But when I got out and I started learning more about networking and kind of seeing how, Uncle EO was moving, that really intrigued me. So I ended up going to school because I knew that was my way out of what I was doing. I couldn't, continue that path for forever. I think I kind of had my scared straight moment. Needless to say, after getting released, it was kind of like, you know what, you got a second chance. And then, the judge basically said, you complete the terms of your probation and we will take this off your record and you'll have a second chance at life, to get gainful employment. And I took it. Went down to Texas Southern University. Yeah. And so, I took on anthropology and sociology, like I said, but then I kind of started figuring out that this is going to be something in order to make a decent income, I'm going to have to go to school and get a master's or even a doctorate. And as a kid going to school on Pell Grants, I didn't have the time. I was like, I need something that's going to translate into cash right away. And so I ended up getting put on academic probation because my job at the time, I was doing promotions with Paid in Full Records, Mad Hatter, and those guys out of Houston. And as a college kid, that probably wasn't a good move for me because I wasn't as disciplined. So I'm going out and getting paid to party, drink, and hang out and stuff. And so I got put on academic probation, and I just never went back. And that's when I just did a whole pivot straight into IT.
Gotcha. Well, for the audience, just a little backstory on how I met Nic. We met in a group called RBA, and I realized amongst all of my arguments with various people, Nic and I would disagree, but we could always disagree respectfully. And he always offered just really good, insightful information. And then I had a couple friends who mentioned getting into tech. And randomly, they mentioned Nic, and you helped, them venture into tech. So it's crazy because, for one, I want to say thank you so much for what you do in the community. But I've personally seen you mentor, young Black men and get them into tech, making six figures. And I just think that's so amazing. And so while you're here, I do want to stop to just give you your flowers and thank you for what you're doing in the community. But now, one of my questions was, what's your why? And I guess, in speaking to you more, I see what your why is. You've essentially become an Austin Uncle EO.
Exactly.
Lending your expertise, your resources to young Black men venturing, who have interest in the field. And can you talk about just some of that mentorship that you bestowed and some of the work that you do in the community?
Yeah, I was always raised to pay it forward when you can. Whether you're dealing in the streets or you're dealing in the boardroom, being a stand-up person is something that people will respect, and more importantly, it's something that will perpetually propel you forward. So if you do what's right for the right reasons, and help people out, you were helped out, you were blessed, and for lack of a better term, then you need to be a blessing to others. And so the best way for me to pay back on Leo was to emulate what he did and make sure that any Black person, or anybody in general, but because I see a stronger need to get people of color into tech. Anybody that's of my community and culture, I wanted to make sure I lent myself to being a resource for them and to them, because you don't see a whole lot of people that are Black and descendants of enslaved people in the tech field. I do see a decent representation from brothers and sisters from Africa and some from the West Indies, but specifically Black Americans. There's not a whole lot of us. And if we are at tech companies, we're not necessarily working in tech roles. We're not the engineers. It is often, not saying that there isn't any, because I've met quite a few, but when you look at it per capita or in proportion to our white, Latin, and Asian counterparts, we definitely have a gap to fill. And, that's why I want to make sure that we get as many people in Austin and around the country into tech, because it can help you be upwardly mobile. It allows you to take control of your work-life balance. Cybersecurity, even before pandemic, was one of the only industries in America that had a negative unemployment rate. So, excuse me, can we edit that one? I'm just going to repeat that.
Sure thing. Edit.
So cybersecurity, even before the pandemic, was one of the few industries in America that had a negative unemployment rate. So, we all know about the great exodus during the pandemic, and everybody, kind of trying to find what they wanted to do. But, specifically within cybersecurity, there's been a drive for talent. And if you are a person of color and you have the skill set for cybersecurity, the world can be your oyster. You would be a talent that people are actually looking for, because you have a lot of the companies that have diversity initiatives and they're wanting to hire people, but then they're saying, well, we don't have a pipeline for it. Or if they do get people of color there, then a lot of times we leave because the culture isn't congruent to our belief system sometimes makes us feel like we're out of place. And the best way to correct that is to get more of us in there, so that way we can, change the culture and effectively, create our own within the tech space.
Gotcha. And thank you so much, because that brings me to my next question. Unfortunately, in my career, I've met some of us who want to, be the only Black person in the room. And that is always so surprising to me, because I think, like you, and you see how I work and network. I try and honestly emulate a lot of things that you do, in that teaching other people, being a resource, informing other people. So I'm always taken back when I do meet those people who do want to be, the only person in the room. So, and you speaking about just the diversity initiatives and things like that, were there ever times that you doubted yourself, being that there weren't many people in your field who looked like you?
100%, and not just because how I look, but also my background. Most of the people that I would meet had gone to college and completed it. I went and I dropped out because I went to school, and like I said, I'd gotten in trouble, moved around a lot. I had to drop out because the credit system for juvenile detention, they have public schools while you go to while you're in jail as a kid, but their credit system's different than the credit system for your local school system. So that kind of led me to a position where I was like, if I don't graduate on time, I'm just going to be a step further. So I went out and grabbed my GED. So having that kind of a background and trying to overcome that, definitely had me, doubting myself at times, experiencing imposter syndrome, where it's like, should I really be here? Or, should I, do I belong? And I think it was around the time when that guy, Edward Snowden, had become famous for divulging secrets.
Right, the WikiLeaks, right?
Yeah, the WikiLeaks guy. And that was, one of the first times where I saw, here's a guy that's making $240,000 a year living in Hawaii, and he's a high school dropout, didn't complete, college. And, he's raking in about $250,000 a year because he's great at what he does. And nobody was worried or focusing on that part of his education or his background. They were focusing on what he did in his works. And so I kind of saw that, a way to, shore up that, as I perceived it at the time, a shortcoming, was to outwork, outperform, and, have people know me for what I do rather than where I've come from.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And so, would you say, in your role, I know probably with all of the experience you've garnered, that you either need the role, the educational experience or the work experience, but getting into cybersecurity, do you need a college degree?
No, you do not. I would say that at the time when I started, back in 2007, it was a little easier to get in, and it was a little more cost effective. But I would say that you should go to school. Usually, the route I give people is certifications, and also community colleges. So that was my first step. Was I pivoted from a traditional four-year school to a community college to get what was known as a MCSE, which was a Microsoft certification for network administration. And it was a 10-month course. At the end of that course, I got a certification that got me a job that got my foot in the door. And then once I started working for a reseller of IT equipment, I was able to get trained by that reseller on different vendors and point products. And so you have certifications that encompass just general industry knowledge. And the way I usually tell people, edit. Sorry about that. I had something fall. And so I usually tell people that, look at it like being a mechanic. You have an ASE mechanic, which kind of means I'm certified to work on all cars. And then you have mechanics that are certified specifically for Mercedes-Benz or Tesla, etc. And so I'd say you go to a community college and get you kind of an ASE or general certification to allow you to work on things in computer networking in general, or security in general. And then from there, you start getting into the specific brands or manufacturers like Juniper, Palo Alto, F5, Cisco, HP, etc. And those certifications combined with time in the seat is what will help you become a little more upwardly mobile. There's people that do have college degrees, and I don't want to discredit those because they do help, especially with the HR process, because a lot of times, recruiters and folks that aren't technical, they look for that because they don't really know the technical side. And so there are some advantages, but when I'm looking at resumes and when I'm tasked with, helping our recruiting department, vet talent, I'm looking for certifications. I'm looking for time in the seat, working on networks or even something you might have built yourself. There's more than one route to get into IT, and a 4-year college degree is not the only or even the preferred route.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And so I know, you talked about being in tech and your background as far as, having an unconventional life and journey into tech, getting into trouble and things like that. But you've also worked with Measure. Can you talk about how we're able to use data to change or impact policy?
Yeah. Co-founded Measure with Mrs. Mimi Styles. We met through a mutual friend. Her goddaughter and best friend's daughter is my daughter's best friend, and so we were talking one day at a party, kind of what could we do to move the needle and within social justice besides marching and raising awareness, because as my grandmother used to say, you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. And so, to use data was something that I proposed, and she'd also been thinking about as well, as a conduit to talk to the other side, to say, hey, if you're not going to do the right thing, or as what I perceive to be the right thing socially for moral reasons, then, let's look at how it affects you in the pocketbook as a taxpayer. Let's look at how it affects things that you actually care about. And we can use data to kind of strip ourselves of the emotional aspect, because a lot of these topics and social issues do have a level of emotion, which is warranted. But when you're trying to come up with solutions with people that you disagree with or might even have some heated discussions with, I find it better to find a route to resolution by stripping out that emotion. You're able to do that with data to kind of start looking at the right routes to resolution for both groups of people. And with Measure, that was the initial intention. We kind of started, spreading out and doing other things in the community outside of just data support, but that was the core heart of what we were, started the organization for. And then as of last year, we're able to enter a competition with MIT. It's called the MIT Solve competition. And we were down selected with a handful of groups from 1,825 submissions from over 120 countries for our solution to the issue, which was trying to leverage technology to combat racism. And so without getting too in the weeds on the solution itself, needless to say, they believed in our vision. As a solution architect, I was able to use my professional experience in, speaking to stakeholders and trying to delineate very complex and technical language and distill it into something that non-technical people can understand, because that's something I have to do on a daily basis. I have to draw up, a very over technical solution. And then if I'm talking to a CFO, they don't care about the ins and outs of application delivery networking. They need to make sure they're passing compliance. They need to make sure it's, solving an issue or and getting the outcome they need. And they need to understand it in a comprehensive form that, in a language they understand. And that was what allowed me to kind of write that RFP type response for this competition, which I think helped it bring it home for the judges at MIT and helped us to win. So I was really proud of that. But after working my day job and then doing that and trying to help bring this app into fruition over the last year, I wanted to take some time back just to be a little more present with my family. So I had to take a step down or step back rather from Measure so I could get more time and smell the roses with, I have a 12-year-old daughter who's growing and glowing, and trying to make sure I'm a lot more present there for her and my wife.
Thank you. So I do want to I stand corrected. I had no idea that you were the co-founder of Measure. And I got familiar with Measure through via Mimi Styles as well, and just seeing how, she was really focused on not the incarceration, but essentially the school to jail pipeline and the policing, the differences and inequities of policing that we see in young Black and brown kids versus, white kids, honestly, in the school system. So that was when I first got familiar with it, but I had no idea you co-founded it. And now that makes so much sense. But thank you so much for just giving us a little bit more insight on that. But I do want to switch to your home life and your family life. I know you said you're a dad and you have a great support system. Could you talk about maybe how your support system has helped you take these risks and take this time and venture into this career, and how important that is for someone who might be wanting to do, a career change?
Yeah, I would say, the cornerstone of my support system was my wife and, my mother and grandmother. Unfortunately, both my mom and grandmother passed in the last 4 years, but, my wife kind of has embodied a lot of their traits as far as, keeping me honest, keeping me straight. And, when we first got together, I was still kind of messing around the streets, and, she found out, what I was doing. And she just basically said, you know what, I know you're trying to, get yourself together and kind of get back on your feet. Because I just recently gone through an issue where I had to relocate and kind of get a new apartment, start all over and stuff. And, regular 9 to 5 just wasn't cutting it, working at a call center at the time. And so she's like, you know what, you got about 2 more months to do that, or you just lose my number. So,
okay, Black woman, I see you with the boundaries. I love that for us.
But what I loved was that, she didn't just off the top just say, I'm not going to mess with you. She, at the time, I'm trying to transition from one life to another and, trying to be a little more legit with what I was doing. And she was understanding of that. She gave me time and grace to, try to get on my feet, and knew that it wouldn't just be a, what, you're doing that, leave me alone, don't talk to me. She's like, you know what, if it's a temporary thing, as you said you needed this amount of time to do that, I'm gonna hold you to what you established as those, guidelines and the timeline that you gave. And if not, then that means you're BSing me, and I don't have time for that myself. And, I'd been through enough bad deals to know a good one when I saw it. So, it was one of those things that I wanted to make the change because I wanted to be with her, and ultimately it ended up working out. We started working together. So it was kind of strange. We ended up working while she was finishing up school and I was going through the Microsoft program I talked about earlier. We both had a day job at a call center, and we were working right next to each other, side by side. So we're working 40 hours a week with each other. Then we go home, and my apartment's across the street from hers. So she's either at my spot or I'm at her spot. So even, before the pandemic, where folks were kind of forced to be around each other and find out that they couldn't stand each other like two broke legs, we ended up, in 8 months saying like, hey, actually, don't mind spending this much time with you. And it actually works. So I think in the 8 months we were together, we probably were together more, had more FaceTime than some folks do in 2 or 3 years. So we got married after 8 months, and we've been together for the last 17 years. And, whenever I needed to, have some extra time to do what I'm doing at Measure, she comes in and helps out with my daughter, and vice versa. When she was doing her career, or, starting her career in real estate investment and property management, I was there and playing Mr. Mom and working from home and being the primary care provider for our kid. And so I think, our ability to support each other and kind of roll with the punches, and you take over in this aspect, whether it's me cooking and cleaning, and then vice versa. When I got stuff to do, then she takes over those roles. Being complimentary of each other, I think has been very helpful. And I just honestly wouldn't be where I'm at without her.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. And shout out to Black Love. It's just remarkable to see, the progress, and just in a few, I would say maybe like couple years that I've networked with you, just to see your continuous journey and to see that upward mobility for not only you, but for your family. So hats off to y'all sticking together and really allowing each other to grow, because clearly y'all aren't who y'all were when you first met. Of course, there's that essence, but there's so many changes, and y'all were still able to just be there for each other, support each other. And I really appreciate you kind of talking about the role reversals. I think a lot of times with being in a relationship now, people think things are always 50-50, or this is my role now and this is your role. But over time, those things change for the needs of the family. And so thank you so much for just, sharing some insight on that. And I saw, I wasn't Facebook stalking, but you just posted, some of the pictures of your trip. Can you talk a little bit about your trip and that time you were able to take away with your family?
Oh yeah. We went to one of our favorite destinations, Anguilla. It's an island I found because a lot of black celebrities go there. Jay-Z and Beyonce ended up having their honeymoon there. I think Shaq's ex-wife got remarried there. And then when I go, I actually typically run into Charlamagne the God from the Breakfast Club. We hung out a few times on the island. But it's a great place where you can lose the crowd and find yourself, is something I always say there, because there's not a lot of people that know about it. I have a couple of friends that were born and raised in Puerto Rico, never even knew about the island, and it's literally a 35-minute flight from Puerto Rico. So, it's white sandy beaches. There's 33 beaches on a small island, only 16 miles long, 3 miles wide. And because there's no cruise ships and there's a lot of kind of restrictions on, boats and things that can come in and out of the island, I think it's a little less traveled, which makes it a lot, cooler of a destination. It's a black island, so much like Jamaica or most of the West Indies, people of African descent run the government and are the primary residents of the island. They're very warm and loving. Like when you show up, they kind of, I don't want to say give you special treatment, but they definitely will treat you a lot differently than you see other people of other nationalities that show up, and they kind of look at you as distant relatives and family. While we stayed at a resort, at night we go clubbing with the staff and go hang out at night, and you just kind of get to know people and end up making a lot of friendships and with people that when we return, we know it's like going to the set of Cheers. Everybody knows your name, and it's just a great place. So I advise everybody that's listening, all black folks, if you do go to the Caribbean, you need to look up Anguilla. It's you can get a flight straight in from Miami now. Before you'd have to fly to St. Martin and catch a boat over, but now they have direct flights. It's a slice of heaven on earth. I think that everybody should try to enjoy at some point.
Well, I'm gonna have to get my money up to do that, because I know you were up there. You seemed like y'all had a pretty extended stay, right?
Yeah, we were out there for about 7-8 days, and try to just do everything we could on the island, man. Went out snorkeling, did a little helicopter tour around the island, chartered a boat just to kind of chill out and pull up and eat at different spots. Because the crazy thing is, it's only 35 square miles, but they have 70 different restaurants on that island. So me, I'm a foodie.
Wow.
I cook, I eat, so it's the culinary capital of the Caribbean. So when you go there, you got to go there with an empty stomach and an open mind.
And some big pockets too. Like, can't forget that. But
yeah.
I do want to speak.
Start working in tech, man.
Right? Yeah, we gonna get offline, because either I'm gonna get in tech or you gonna get my partner in tech. But we gonna figure this out.
Amen.
But I always just when I'm talking to people here in Austin, especially us, I'm always talking about the market. I work for the government. We're looking at market trends all of the time. And I tell us, like, if you're not looking to get into tech or real estate, what are you doing to stay above the curve in Austin? I see those markets probably being the strongest markets in Austin. And of course, with the cost of living and the inflation and things like that, I know we talked about it offline, but you were like, I hate that this is happening in the community, but we have to be able to be forward thinking, because you were able to get ahead of that, to where, of course, inflation is happening, cost of living is rising. But with you and your wife, one being in real estate, you being in tech, y'all don't necessarily feel that in the way of people who may not have, a higher socioeconomic status. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the last recession, the one from 07, 08, the housing recession that we had previously, is kind of what got my wife and I to get really disciplined with our finances, and more importantly, with our future. We'd always, wanted to do things like, for example, we got married at home, so that way we could save that money and, put it towards the down payment of our home and a house. But we had to really start looking at what were we going to do to stave off, inflation? Because that's when I realized, shoot, these recessions come, at least once every decade or once every 15 years or so. So while we're getting out of this one, another one's coming, and you got to start stacking for that one. So that way, you can weather the storm, and more importantly, you can capitalize on it. When recessions happen now, I've been fortunate and blessed enough to be in a position where it actually is a good thing because I can start buying, assets or stocks, things of that nature at a cheaper price because of the economic turmoil. And, with her, picking real estate investment and then working in property management and me working in IT, those are two, like you said, career fields that we saw would be advantageous. But regardless of what you do, if you're a chef, if you are a project manager, whatever you do for a living, just realize that, when times are good, that's when you need to really be stacking your chips, saving them and investing them, and not just doing it when things start going bad. Because I've seen that especially during the pandemic, and we started seeing a lot of folks getting into investing and stuff, which is great. But I also feel like these are some moves that some of us, especially if you're over 30, like we are, that we could have been looking at before, and that we had the option to, and now that it's on our purview. Just like me, last time it was a recession that helped me kind of wise up. Well, I hope that this current recession and this point of economic turmoil I'm seeing it kind of awaken more people in our community to be more cognizant of investing. And I actually am a lot more hopeful that once we get out of it, because we will pull through this, and when we do, I really feel that a lot of us are going to be a lot stronger and more prepared for the next recession, because it's kind of a light bulb moment for a lot of people. And with social media, around, unlike it was before, I think it's kind of helped our collective consciousness, whether it's around investing in cryptocurrency, stocks, real estate. I'm just glad to see more Black people talking about those things than they were 10, 15 years ago. So that gives me some hope that I think things are going to get better for us as a whole as we, march through this economic turmoil.
Well, thank you so much, Nic. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me today. I would, I'm so appreciative, and not just for me, but for the community. I think in this call, you've dropped so many gems, and I just really appreciate you allowing me to interview you, not just for me, but for the culture. I will be tagging Nic and just talking a little bit more about some of the work that he does. We definitely went over for this interview. So for the extended interview, you can hop on my YouTube and listen to that. But Nic, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me, but also for the work you do in the community. I'm not going to be putting out all your information out there because I know you work so much in the community. You have your day job and you are enjoying your family. But if y'all have any questions that y'all want me to route to Nic for resources or anything like that, please feel free to reach out. And Nic, before I let you go, is there anything else you would like to say or leave us with?
I just want to first thank you for the opportunity. Hopefully, this could be inspiring to somebody that's looking to get into tech, to know that you don't have to doubt yourself, or it doesn't matter how old you are, what part of your career, or
where you come from and what's your background.
There's a lot of upward mobility in tech. The only thing is you're going to have to stick with it. It's not going to be an overnight thing. It might take you a couple years, but I can guarantee that as long as you're consistent, it will pay off. I promise it will pay off.
Thank you. Thank y'all so much for tuning into Keys to the Streets. Y'all have a great morning.